Your mom probably lit a cigarette in the grocery store while you rode in the back of the pickup truck with no seatbelt. Nobody called the cops. Nobody even looked twice. That was just a Tuesday in 1984. But today, half the things your family did without thinking twice would get you fined, arrested, or reported to child services. Some of them carry actual jail time now. Number 42 on this list was something nearly every dad in America did on a Saturday afternoon. And number 17 on this list was so common in schoolyards that teachers handed them out as prizes. So if you grew up in the 80s and want to see just how much the rules have changed, hit subscribe. Because here are 60 things that are illegal now, but were perfectly normal in the 1980s. Hair became another target of control, especially for boys. If your hair touched your collar or ears, you risked suspension or public humiliation. Principals would walk the halls with rulers, checking length against the dress code. Long hair was seen as a threat, a sign of rebellion, nonconformity, or even moral weakness. Some schools kept scissors in the office to fix violations on the spot. For many students, hair became a quiet protest against authority, a way to express individuality when few other options existed. Parents argued with schools, but change came slowly. The hair wars of the 1970s were about more than style. They were about identity, freedom, and the right to be different in a system built to make everyone the same. Nothing said comfort like curling up under an electric blanket on a cold night. They were luxury and warmth rolled into one, a modern marvel for the modern family. But early models had a dangerous flaw: poor wiring. Wires frayed inside the fabric, sparks flew, and fires started in the middle of the night. The cozy hum of electricity felt like progress itself. No more cold sheets or frosty mornings. But inside those blankets, tangled wires rubbed and wore thin with each use, turning comfort into kindling. One overheated coil could transform a peaceful night into a blaze that consumed the very bed it was meant to warm. What was supposed to be comfort became catastrophe. People trusted their blankets to keep them safe and warm, not realizing that one flick of the switch could ignite the bed beneath them. Manufacturers eventually added safety switches and temperature controls, but not before tragedy struck countless homes. The danger of electric blankets was quiet but terrifying. It lived in the very object meant to bring comfort. Even now, some still remember that faint electrical smell, the hum of danger disguised as luxury. Slap bracelets were everywhere in the late 1980s. Classrooms, malls, playgrounds. Kids collected them by the dozen, showing off neon colors and wild patterns. The trick was simple. Snap the straight band against your wrist and watch it curl around perfectly. Some kids took it a step further, slapping them across backpacks, arms, and even faces in playful fights. The noise of a dozen bracelets snapping at once could fill an entire hallway, driving teachers insane. For a few glorious years, they were the ultimate symbol of rebellion, something that annoyed adults but made you instantly cool. But beneath that fabric lay a thin strip of sharp-edged metal. Over time, the covering wore down or tore, revealing the raw steel underneath. Soon, reports of cut wrists and sliced skin started pouring in. Some schools banned them outright, calling them distracting and dangerous. Still, the craze was unstoppable for a while. Every kid wanted to hear that satisfying snap, no matter how many warnings came from teachers or parents. They were the perfect mix of rebellion and style, a fashion statement that literally left its mark. Charcoal and Robitussin. AC sat on the same pharmacy shelf as Band-Aids and rubbing alcohol, and they did not require a prescription. These cherry-flavored cough syrups contained codeine, an opioid derived from the same poppy plant as morphine, blended with a generous pour of grain alcohol. When cold season hit a household, parents dosed the entire family from the same bottle, spooning it into children as young as 3 or 4 years old. The codeine suppressed the cough by acting directly on the brain's cough center, and the alcohol ensured that everyone slept deeply whether they needed to or not. Nobody called it what it was: an opioid sedative mixed with liquor, dispensed to minors without medical supervision. It was not until the late 1970s that the FDA began restricting codeine-containing cough preparations, and some formulations remained available without a prescription well into the 1990s. The playground at your elementary school in 1982 was not designed with safety in mind. It was designed to survive weather. The monkey bars were welded steel pipe, rising 10 or 12 feet above packed dirt or cracked asphalt. The slides were bare metal that absorbed the summer sun until they could raise blisters on exposed skin. The merry-go-rounds were heavy iron platforms spinning fast enough to launch a child sideways, and the seesaws were wooden planks on steel fulcrums that could crack a jaw on the way down. In 1981, the Consumer Product Safety Commission published its first handbook for public playground safety after tracking thousands of emergency room visits. The CDC declared traditional monkey bars unsuitable for safe playgrounds in the early 1980s. 75% of all playground injuries resulted from falls onto inadequate surfaces. The equipment stayed in place at most schools for another decade. It cost nothing to say one sentence, but it made Calvin Klein a fortune. In 1980, 15-year-old Brooke Shields looked into Richard Avedon's camera and delivered a line that would define boundary-free advertising for a decade. "You want to know what comes between me and my Calvins? Nothing." CBS and ABC refused to air the spot. Reverend Donald Wildman of the National Federation for Decency called for a nationwide boycott, accusing the brand of exploiting a minor for profit. Shields later told Vogue she did not understand the innuendo at the time and was blindsided by the backlash. None of it mattered to the bottom line. Klein moved over 200,000 pairs of jeans in a single week. Shields was dropped after 1 year, not because of the scandal, but because the designer wanted his name on the product, not hers. The commercial that would trigger an immediate FTC investigation today was, in 1980, just another ad buy. Tableside Caesar salad prepared with raw egg yolks was one of the most theatrical dining experiences of the 1970s, performed by waiters who cracked fresh eggs directly into wooden bowls while guests watched in admiration. The ritual felt elegant as the server whisked the yolk into anchovies, garlic, and lemon juice, creating a creamy dressing that coated every leaf of romaine. Diners trusted the spectacle completely, never questioning whether those eggs had been inspected or tested for bacteria that could turn a fancy dinner into a medical emergency. Restaurants prided themselves on this showmanship, treating the raw egg as a mark of authenticity rather than a hazard. Families celebrated special occasions around these salads, and everyone cleaned their plates without a single worry. But salmonella outbreaks eventually forced regulators to examine raw egg preparations in commercial kitchens. Today, most restaurants either pasteurize their eggs, skip the yolk entirely, or face strict health code scrutiny for serving anything uncooked. The dramatic tableside Caesar that once impressed generations of diners is now a liability most kitchens refuse to risk. Danger in a 1970s bathroom was not just behind the walls, it was under your bare feet. Vinyl floor tiles manufactured by Armstrong, Kentile, and Flint Coat contained asbestos fibers mixed directly into the material for durability and heat resistance. They were installed in millions of bathrooms from the 1920s through the late 70s, and the black mastic adhesive used to glue them down also contained asbestos. As long as the tiles stayed intact, the fibers remained trapped. But bathroom floors take constant abuse. Moisture warps the edges, foot traffic cracks the surface, and when a tile chipped or broke, microscopic asbestos fibers became airborne in a small enclosed room with poor ventilation. The EPA began restricting asbestos in the late 1970s, but tiles already installed were never required to be removed. Every bathroom renovation in an older home carried the risk of releasing a known carcinogen into the lungs of whoever was standing nearby with a scraper in hand. Cereals containing brominated vegetable oil had a peculiar role in the breakfast aisle during the 1980s, used to keep citrus flavoring evenly suspended in the product so every bite tasted consistent. This additive was invisible, odorless, and completely unknown to families who simply wanted their orange-flavored cereal to taste the way the commercials promised. Nobody realized that bromine, the element at the heart of this chemical, could accumulate in the body over time and cause problems ranging from skin issues to nervous system concerns. Parents poured these cereals into bowls with complete trust, believing that anything sold in a supermarket had been thoroughly tested and approved. The truth was more complicated. Regulators in other countries began banning brominated vegetable oil long before the United States took action, leaving American families exposed while the rest of the world moved on. Today, several states have finally outlawed this additive, but for decades it sat quietly in cereals that children ate every morning. The cheerful orange mascots on the box never mentioned what was lurking in the formula. Hexachlorophene antibacterial soap was marketed as the ultimate weapon against germs, sold to hospitals, households, and especially to new parents who wanted the best protection for their babies. The chemical killed bacteria so effectively that it became standard in everything from surgical scrubs to baby powder, trusted by medical professionals and families alike. Nurseries across the country bathed newborns in products containing hexachlorophene, believing they were shielding fragile immune systems. The antibacterial power seemed like pure progress. But hexachlorophene absorbs through skin far more readily than anyone realized. And in infants, that absorption happened at dangerous rates. Reports surfaced of brain damage, neurological problems, and deaths in babies bathed repeatedly in products containing the chemical. The medical community was horrified to discover that something used so confidently had caused such devastating harm. Regulators moved quickly, restricting hexachlorophene to prescription-only use and banning it from over-the-counter products entirely. The soap that once symbolized cleanliness became a haunting reminder that even medical consensus can be dangerously wrong. Rainbow diet pills with multiple drug combinations were the candy-colored answer to weight loss that doctors prescribed with unsettling confidence throughout the 1970s. Each capsule came in a different bright hue, and together they formed a regimen that promised to attack fat from every angle. One pill contained amphetamines to crush appetite, another held thyroid hormones to speed metabolism, a third delivered digitalis to affect heart rate, and a fourth packed laxatives to flush the system clean. Women lined them up on kitchen counters like vitamins, swallowing the rainbow each morning without realizing they were mixing chemicals that had no business being combined. Doctors rarely explained what was inside, and patients rarely asked because the results spoke loudly enough. But hearts raced unpredictably, thyroids went haywire, and digestive systems suffered lasting damage. When regulators investigated, they discovered these combinations had never been properly tested. The practice was banned, prescriptions revoked, and the cheerful rainbow became a symbol of reckless medicine. Today, combining drugs this way would end careers and trigger lawsuits. Kinder Surprise eggs seemed like the most magical candy invention ever created when they appeared in European stores. A hollow chocolate shell hiding a tiny toy capsule that children could discover and assemble. The concept combined two of childhood's greatest loves into one irresistible package, and kids everywhere begged their parents to buy them. But American children would never legally experience that particular thrill, because the United States had banned these treats since 1938 under a law prohibiting non-nutritive objects embedded inside food products. The concern was simple and serious. Small children could bite into the chocolate, reach the plastic capsule, and choke before anyone realized what was happening. The FDA treated Kinder eggs as a genuine safety threat, issuing warnings to travelers who tried smuggling them across borders. Customs agents confiscated thousands of the eggs every year, sometimes issuing fines up to $2,500 per egg. The ban frustrated American parents who had enjoyed the treats abroad and wanted to share the experience with their own children. It felt strange that something so beloved worldwide remained contraband in the land of the free. Alar-treated apple juice and snacks were marketed directly to children in the 1980s, filling lunchboxes with juice boxes, fruit leather, and applesauce cups that seemed like perfect healthy choices for growing kids. Parents trusted Apple products above almost anything else, believing they were giving their children nature's own sweetness in a convenient package. What families did not know was that many apples were sprayed with alar, a growth regulator that kept fruit on trees longer and produced those perfectly round shapes grocers preferred to display. Researchers discovered that alar broke down into a chemical compound linked to cancer, especially concerning because children consumed apple products at far higher rates than adults relative to their body weight. When the news broke nationally, panic spread through neighborhoods as parents dumped juice boxes, threw out applesauce, and demanded answers from companies that had stayed silent too long. The alar scare became one of the defining food controversies of the decade, proving that even the most wholesome-looking snacks could carry dangers invisible to every parent who packed a lunchbox with love. Meeting loved ones directly at the departure gate was one of the most emotional rituals of air travel in the 1970s, when families walked together through terminals until the very last moment before boarding began. Parents hugged their children at the gate entrance, grandparents waved through windows as planes pulled away, and couples shared long embraces in full view of other passengers waiting nearby. Nobody needed a ticket to enter the terminal beyond the front doors. Security checkpoints existed, but they were brief and welcoming, treating everyone as guests rather than suspects. Friends arrived early just to sit with travelers and share a final cup of coffee before the flight. The gate area felt like an extension of the waiting room, filled with laughter, tears, and promises to write or call. It was a time when saying goodbye happened face-to-face, not through text messages sent from a distant curb. Today, only ticketed passengers pass beyond security, and loved ones wait in lobbies far removed from boarding. The intimate farewells that once defined departures have been replaced by sterile checkpoints prioritizing safety over sentiment. Partially hydrogenated vegetable shortening was the invisible ingredient that made everything in the cafeteria taste better, richer, and more satisfying than it had any right to be. Cooks used it for frying, baking, and greasing every pan that produced the foods children loved most. The shortening came in large containers beside industrial stoves, scooped out by the cupful and melted into recipes passed down through decades of school food service. Nobody questioned it because nobody knew there was anything to question. Trans fats extended shelf life, improved texture, and cost far less than butter or other alternatives. The cookies were flakier, the pie crusts more tender, and the fried foods crispier because of this single ingredient that touched nearly everything on the menu. But scientists discovered that trans fats raised bad cholesterol while lowering the good kind, creating a cardiovascular danger that lurked in every bite. When evidence became undeniable, regulators banned partially hydrogenated oils entirely. School kitchens had to reformulate everything, replacing the shortening that had defined cafeteria cooking for generations. The foods remain, but they taste different now. Public punishment in classrooms was another normal part of 1970s schooling, and nothing symbolized that better than the dunce chair. If you were caught daydreaming, laughing too loud, or falling behind, you could be made to sit at the front of the class facing the wall while everyone else stared. Sometimes teachers made kids wear a paper hat or hold a sign that said slow or lazy. Humiliation was a teaching tool, and students were told it would make them stronger. But the truth was, it made children terrified of making mistakes. Many adults still feel that pang of shame when they think about being singled out for something as small as a spelling error. The dunce chair was less about correction and more about control, a way to remind everyone watching what happens if you step out of line. Today, that kind of cruelty would never pass as education. Few inventions felt more modern than non-stick cookware. Teflon promised freedom from scrubbing, stuck eggs, and greasy messes. Housewives and young couples alike embraced it as a symbol of convenience and progress. It was advertised as the perfect marriage of science and home life, sleek, spotless, and futuristic. The shine of those silver pans reflected an entire generation's faith in technology. But inside that slick surface lurked a chemical secret that no one could pronounce, much less understand. But what they did not know was that overheating a Teflon pan, something as simple as forgetting it on the stove, could release invisible toxic fumes. Birds dropped from their perches, families complained of dizziness and coughing. Manufacturers brushed it off, calling it harmless. Yet behind closed doors, Scientists knew those fumes came from chemicals that could cause flu-like symptoms in humans and death in pets. The same coating that made cooking easier also made breathing more dangerous. Teflon was progress, but at a price no one could see. Looking back, it is unsettling how something designed to make life cleaner ended up polluting the very air of the American kitchen. Moon shoes promised the dream of anti-gravity, a trampoline you could wear on your feet. Kids strapped them on and bounced across driveways, pretending they were astronauts. It was exciting, wild, and completely unpredictable. Friends would challenge each other to jump higher or run while wearing them, often ending in spectacular wipeouts. The sound of laughter mixed with the inevitable thud of someone hitting the ground was part of every moon shoe memory. Despite the danger, the feeling of defying gravity, even for a few seconds, was too tempting to resist. The rubber bands that provided the spring were unstable, snapping or slipping without warning. One wrong jump, and you were face first on the pavement. Sprained ankles, twisted knees, and a few broken noses were common battle scars. But that did not stop kids from begging for a pair every Christmas. The commercials made them look effortless, like floating on the moon, but in reality, it was like strapping chaos to your feet. The 1980s loved risk, and moon shoes captured that spirit perfectly. Part science fiction, part disaster waiting to happen. Mercurochrome was the first thing your mother reached for when you came inside bleeding. That bright red-orange liquid dabbed onto a skinned knee or a sliced finger with a glass applicator stung just enough to make you believe it was working. Every medicine cabinet in the country had a bottle. What families did not know was that the active compound, merbramine, was a mercury derivative developed at Johns Hopkins University in the early 1900s. Mercury, even in small concentrations, is a neurotoxin that accumulates in fatty tissue with each exposure. It does not flush out, it builds up. Every scrape, every cut, every playground fall meant another dose absorbed directly through broken skin. Questions about its toxicity were raised as early as 1931, and poisoning reports surfaced for decades. The FDA spent half a century looking the other way, and it was not until 1998 that the agency finally reclassified mercurochrome as an untested drug, effectively pulling it from American shelves. But the dangers were not limited to the road. They followed your kids right through the front door, because in the 1980s, millions of American kids came home from school every afternoon to an empty house. They were called latchkey kids, named for the house key strung around their necks on a shoelace, and by the mid-1980s, the term described an estimated 7 million children under the age of 13. A 1984 documentary called them day orphans. Their parents were not negligent. They were working, often 2 jobs, in an economy that offered almost no affordable after-school care. But a 6-year-old heating soup on a gas stove, answering the door to strangers, and managing household emergencies alone for 3 or 4 hours every afternoon was considered perfectly normal. Illinois now sets the minimum age for leaving a child home alone at 14. In the 1980s, most states had no minimum at all. The Johns Manville promoted asbestos as a miracle material, the foundation of a safe, fireproof American home. Their ads showed families in kitchens insulated with asbestos, kids beneath asbestos ceiling tiles, and workers handling the product without a dust mask. The faintly sweet smell of freshly cut asbestos board filled construction sites across the country, and nobody on the job questioned it. Internal correspondence unearthed during 70s and 80s lawsuits, known as the Sumner-Simpson Papers, revealed that executives had known for decades the material caused fatal lung disease. They discussed cancer risks in private memos while running public campaigns calling asbestos clean and modern. Dr. Irving Selikoff confirmed in the 1960s that exposure caused mesothelioma. The EPA issued a final rule banning most asbestos products in 1989, more than 40 years after the company's own scientists sounded the alarm. All-you-can-eat raw oyster bars with no health warnings were coastal treasures in the 1970s, drawing crowds who slurped down dozens of briny shellfish without anyone mentioning the risks lurking inside each shell. Restaurants stacked oysters on ice and let customers consume as many as their stomachs could hold, charging one flat price for unlimited access. People treated it like a competition, bragging about how many they could eat while servers shucked fresh batches to keep pace. Nobody posted signs about bacteria, nobody warned about compromised immune systems, and nobody tracked how long those oysters had been sitting out. The ice looked clean, the shells glistened, and that was enough reassurance for most diners. What people did not realize was that raw oysters could harbor Vibrio bacteria capable of causing severe illness. Today, restaurants are required to display health warnings about raw shellfish consumption, and unlimited raw bars face strict oversight. The carefree oyster feasts of the 70s have given way to cautious disclaimers and portion tracking that would have seemed absurd to anyone raising a shell back then. Georgia Pacific, National Gypsum, and several other manufacturers sold joint compound and spackling paste containing chrysotile asbestos throughout the 1960s and 70s. It was used to finish drywall seams, patch cracks, and smooth bathroom walls before painting. The product went on wet and was sanded smooth once dry, and the sanding was the problem. Each pass of the sandpaper launched a fine cloud of dust loaded with asbestos fibers into the air. In a bathroom, where the space was small and the door was usually closed, fiber concentrations could spike within minutes. The CPSC banned asbestos in spackling compounds and joint compound in 1977, but the material already applied to millions of bathroom walls was not affected by the rule. Homeowners who patched, sanded, or refinished their own bathroom walls through the 80s and 90s had no idea what they were inhaling. The compound looked like ordinary plaster dust. It was not. Cereal's marketing disease prevention claims without approval were boldly promising health benefits that would never survive modern regulatory scrutiny. Boxes declared that eating a particular cereal could lower cholesterol, prevent heart disease, strengthen bones, or boost immunity in ways that sounded scientific but had little evidence behind them. Parents shopping for their families saw these claims and assumed they had been verified by doctors or government agencies. The reality was messier. Companies made statements based on flimsy studies or wishful interpretations, and regulators lacked the resources to challenge every misleading box on the shelf. Children grew up believing sugary cereal was practically medicine, a health food wrapped in cartoon characters and bright colors. By the time federal agencies cracked down on unsubstantiated health claims, an entire generation had already absorbed the message that breakfast cereal could cure whatever ailed them. Looking back, those bold promises feel almost absurd, but in the 1980s they shaped how families thought about nutrition in ways that took decades to undo. Des pregnancy support medication was prescribed to millions of expectant mothers as a breakthrough drug that could prevent miscarriages and ensure healthy deliveries. Doctors recommended it confidently, and pharmaceutical companies marketed it as a modern miracle for women who struggled to carry pregnancies. Mothers took the pills faithfully, believing they were protecting their unborn children. The drug seemed to work, and grateful families welcomed healthy babies without suspecting long-term consequences. But DES did not disappear after birth. The synthetic hormone had altered the developing bodies of daughters still in the womb, causing changes that would not reveal themselves until those daughters reached adulthood. Years later, young women developed a rare form of vaginal cancer at rates that defied explanation. Investigators traced the cases back to their mother's DES prescriptions, uncovering one of the most disturbing examples of delayed pharmaceutical harm in history. The drug was banned, but damage had already spread across a generation of daughters who never knew they were exposed until their own health crises began. Phenylpropanolamine appetite suppressants sat on drugstore shelves throughout the 1970s, available to anyone who wanted to curb hunger without a prescription. The chemical was marketed under friendly brand names, packaged in cheerful boxes, and advertised as a safe way to take control of overeating. People bought them by the millions, trusting that anything sold so openly must have been tested. Eaters swallowed these pills before meals, during work breaks, and even before bed, believing the ingredient was as harmless as caffeine. What they did not know was that phenylpropanolamine affected blood vessels in ways that could trigger sudden strokes, especially in young women who seemed otherwise healthy. For years, reports trickled in about unexplained hemorrhages and neurological damage, but the connection took time to prove. When researchers confirmed the link, regulators pulled phenylpropanolamine from the market entirely, banning it from diet pills and cold medicines alike. The decision came decades after these products first appeared, leaving countless people wondering whether symptoms they experienced came from something they bought casually. Jelly Cup Mini Gel candies were the colorful little cups of jiggly sweetness that children slurped down by the handful during the 1980s and 90s, not realizing that the texture they loved could turn deadly in seconds. These treats came in small plastic cups filled with konjac gel, a substance derived from the konjac plant that created an unusually firm, slippery consistency. Children loved squeezing the cups to pop the gel directly into their mouths, often swallowing the entire piece without chewing. The problem was that konjac gel did not dissolve like regular gelatin. When a piece lodged in a small throat, it stayed there, blocking airways in ways that made the Heimlich maneuver nearly useless. Deaths began accumulating across multiple countries, many involving young children who choked on these seemingly harmless treats. The FDA issued import alerts and warnings, and by 2001, the agency had effectively banned konjac gel candies from entering the United States. The sweet little cups that had been party favors and lunchbox treats became symbols of how texture could transform a treat into tragedy. Lead-soldered canned fruits and vegetables lined pantry shelves throughout the 1980s, promising convenience and long shelf life for busy families who trusted these sealed containers completely. Canned peaches, fruit cocktail, green beans, and corn sat for months waiting to be opened and served at dinner tables across the country. What families could not see was the seam running along the side of each can, sealed with lead solder that slowly leached into the acidic contents inside over time. Every time someone opened a can of tomatoes or pineapple chunks, they were potentially serving food contaminated with a neurotoxin known to damage developing brains in children. Young kids were especially vulnerable to these effects, absorbing lead far more easily than adults and suffering cognitive damage that could last a lifetime. When researchers finally traced elevated blood lead levels back to canned food consumption, the industry was forced to switch to safer sealing methods almost immediately. The cans that once symbolized modern convenience became troubling artifacts of an era that unknowingly poisoned its own pantry staples. Flying without showing any form of identification was perfectly normal in the 1970s, when a paper ticket was the only thing standing between a traveler and their seat on the plane. People bought tickets at counters using cash, gave whatever name they chose, and walked directly to the gate without anyone verifying who they actually were. Families traveling together handed over a stack of tickets, and agents processed them without matching faces to documents. Business travelers moved through airports like ghosts, anonymous and unbothered by questions about identity. The system operated on trust, assuming that anyone purchasing a ticket intended to travel peacefully. Photo identification existed, but airlines rarely demanded it. Drivers' licenses stayed in wallets unless international travel required them. The ease of it all feels almost impossible to imagine today. Modern airports require government-issued identification at multiple checkpoints, matching names against databases with unforgiving precision. Travelers without proper documentation are turned away regardless of their tickets. What was once as simple as handing over a slip of paper now requires verified proof that you are exactly who you claim to be. White bread for every sandwich was the unspoken rule in school cafeterias throughout the 1980s. Soft slices that held together peanut butter, bologna, and whatever else lunch workers assembled each morning. The bread was pale, pillowy, and completely devoid of anything resembling whole grain nutrition. Kids loved it because it was familiar, the same bread their mothers used at home, the same texture they associated with comfort and normalcy. Nobody questioned whether refined flour was good for growing bodies because nobody thought about bread as anything other than a vehicle for fillings. Schools bought it in bulk because it was cheap, lasted long, and never drew complaints from picky eaters. The sandwiches stacked up on trays by the hundreds, wrapped in plastic or nestled in paper boats, waiting for hungry students who never imagined their bread choices mattered. But when nutrition science caught up with cafeteria menus, white bread became a symbol of everything wrong with school lunches. Federal mandates now require that at least half of all grains served in schools be whole grain rich, effectively banning the pure white bread that once dominated every lunch line. Patriotism was mandatory in the 1970s classroom. Every morning began with the Pledge of Allegiance, and refusing to stand was seen as an act of defiance. Students who stayed seated or silent could face detention, suspension, or even expulsion. It was less about love of country and more about enforcing obedience. Some kids quietly mouthed the words to avoid punishment, while others looked down at their desks, hearts pounding in defiance they could not voice. A few brave ones refused entirely, sparking whispers, outrage, or even calls to their parents. Those moments turned a daily routine into a test of loyalty no child should have had to face. Teachers were expected to report disrespectful students, and principals treated it like insubordination. Few questioned whether forcing loyalty was loyalty at all. Many children recited the words automatically, their voices blending into a rhythm they never truly thought about. Decades later, the idea of punishing someone for silent protest feels completely un-American, yet that was the daily reality. The 1970s may have looked free and expressive on the surface, but inside the classroom, conformity was law. In the era of modern living, asbestos was marketed as a miracle material. It was heat-resistant, fireproof, and affordable, everything a builder could want. Homeowners proudly installed asbestos ceiling tiles, believing they were upgrading to a safer, more sophisticated home. No one questioned what was in the panels that covered their heads. When the tiles aged, cracked, or were cut during renovations, microscopic fibers filled the air, unseen but deadly. Families breathed it in for years, never suspecting the quiet danger in every breath. It was only later that doctors linked those fibers to lung cancer and mesothelioma, a cruel legacy of convenience. The saddest part is how long it took for the truth to surface. People trusted the advertisements, the packaging, and the promise of safety. Those ceilings were meant to insulate, but they ended up haunting countless lives. The shiny, modern touch of the 1970s turned out to be one of the deadliest materials ever brought into American homes. From the 1930s through the 1960s, Lysol disinfectant was the best-selling feminine hygiene product in the United States, not because women chose it freely, but because gynecologists recommended it. Advertisements featured female physicians in clinical settings, assuring women that douching with diluted Lysol would protect their marriages. The real message, barely coded, was contraception. With birth control still illegal under the Comstock laws until 1965, Lysol offered the illusion of pregnancy prevention. It did not work. A 1933 study at Newark's Maternal Health Center found that of 507 women who used Lysol regularly, nearly half became pregnant. The formula contained cresol until 1953, a caustic phenolic compound that burned vaginal tissue on contact. By 1911, doctors had already documented 193 poisonings and 5 deaths from Lysol douching. It was perfectly ordinary for a 10-year-old to walk into a corner store in 1983, slap a crumpled dollar bill on the counter, and ask for a pack of Marlboros for Dad. The clerk would hand them over without blinking, sometimes tossing in a piece of penny candy for the trouble. There was no federal minimum age for purchasing tobacco in the 1980s. State laws varied wildly, and even where age restrictions existed, enforcement was almost non-existent. The Sinar Amendment, passed in 1992, was the first federal law requiring states to enforce minimum-age tobacco sales, threatening to cut substance abuse funding for states that failed to comply. Before that, Philip Morris called proposed age limits a threat to their core business in a 1986 internal strategy document. Kids were not just buying cigarettes for their parents. They were the tobacco industry's future customers, and everyone from the manufacturer to the shopkeeper knew it. He-Man did not start as a cartoon. He started as an action figure that needed a commercial, and in the deregulated world of 80s kids television, The entire show became that commercial. G.I. Joe, Transformers, Thundercats, and Gem existed primarily to introduce new toys that appeared in stores the same week their episodes aired. Each half-hour program was a product demonstration wrapped in a storyline, and the FCC's relaxed rules under the Reagan administration made it legal. Cartoon violence jumped from roughly 18 acts per hour in 1980 to over 26 by 1990. The moral epilogues tacked onto each show, the knowing is half the battle segments, were calculated additions meant to keep regulators at bay. Congress passed a bill to curb the practice in 1988. Reagan pocket vetoed it. The Children's Television Act did not arrive until 1990. Self-serve salad bars without sneeze guards or temperature controls were the pride of family restaurants in the 1970s, stretching across dining rooms like colorful gardens of lettuce, tomatoes, and mysterious creamy dressings. People loved the freedom to pile their plates high, returning again and again without anyone monitoring how long the food had been sitting out. Kids reached across bowls with bare hands, adults sampled items directly from serving spoons, and nobody thought twice about the hours those vegetables spent at room temperature. The dressings sat in open containers, sometimes crusted at the edges, sometimes topped with a film that regulars simply stirred away. Restaurants trusted the honor system, believing customers would use tongs instead of fingers. What nobody discussed was how quickly bacteria multiplied in unrefrigerated conditions, or how easily one sick customer could contaminate an entire spread. Today, food safety codes require sneeze guards, temperature monitoring, and constant supervision for any self-serve station. The carefree salad bar of the 70s has been replaced by barriers and regulations designed to prevent the illnesses nobody saw coming. In the early 1970s, a residential water heater shipped with its thermostat preset to 140 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, no warning label on the unit, no anti-scald mixing valve on any faucet, and no industry standard suggesting a safer setting. At 140 degrees, a child's skin sustained a severe burn in 3 seconds. At 120, the same injury took 10 minutes. That 20-degree gap was the difference between a safe bath and a hospital visit, but nobody adjusted for it. The Consumer Product Safety Commission reported that tap water scalds hospitalized 1,500 Americans annually and killed roughly 100. 34% of scald burns in young kids happened in the bathroom. Washington State passed the first law requiring water heaters to be preset to 120 degrees in 1983. Manufacturers did not adopt a voluntary national standard until 1988. Cereals with in-box plastic toys touching food were once one of the greatest thrills a child could experience at the breakfast table. The prize sat buried somewhere deep inside the bag, wrapped in thin plastic or sometimes not wrapped at all, waiting to be discovered by eager fingers digging through flakes and puffs. Kids loved the hunt, shaking boxes in store aisles to hear the rattle, then racing home to plunge their hands into the cereal and emerge victorious with a tiny figurine, decoder ring, or miniature game. Parents tolerated the mess because the joy on their children's faces was worth a few spilled Cheerios. But what nobody considered was how those small plastic parts could break, chip, or detach, turning a harmless prize into a choking hazard sitting inches from a child's mouth. By 1988, millions of toys were recalled after reports of children gagging on broken pieces. The magic of finding treasure in your breakfast slowly faded as safety concerns grew louder. Today, prizes are sealed outside the food, if they exist at all, and the golden age of in-box toys belongs to a world that no longer trusts small plastic buried in places children eat. Radium glow wristwatches represented the cutting edge of convenience in the 1970s, allowing wearers to check the time in total darkness without fumbling for a lamp. The soft green glow emanating from the dial felt almost magical, a tiny piece of advanced technology strapped right to your wrist. Advertisements emphasized how practical these watches were for travelers, shift workers, and anyone who valued knowing the hour at a glance. What most buyers never considered was that the glow came from actual radioactive material painted directly onto the watch face. Every moment the watch sat against skin, It emitted low-level radiation that accumulated over years of daily wear. Factory workers who painted these dials suffered terribly, developing cancers and bone diseases that shocked researchers. The watches posed smaller but measurable risks, especially when worn constantly or when the paint deteriorated and released radioactive dust. Once the danger became public, regulators banned radium from consumer products entirely. Today, these watches are collectible curiosities, but handling them requires caution, a reminder that innovation can carry invisible dangers lasting generations. HCG hormone injections for weight loss promised something that sounded almost too good to be true. A natural hormone that would melt fat away while dieters survived on just 500 calories a day. In the 1970s, clinics sprang up offering these injections alongside strict eating plans that left patients constantly hungry but convinced they were following a medically supervised miracle. The hormone, human chorionic gonadotropin, is produced during pregnancy and was marketed as a fat-dissolving agent despite no credible evidence supporting the claim. People paid fees for daily injections, believing the hormone was doing something magical while they starved themselves thin. Doctors offering the treatment rarely explained that any weight loss came from extreme calorie restriction, not the injections. When researchers investigated, they found no proof that HCG contributed to weight loss beyond what starvation alone accomplished. Regulators eventually banned the marketing of HCG for diet purposes, declaring the claims fraudulent. Today, selling HCG for weight loss is illegal, but clinics left behind patients who spent fortunes chasing a lie dressed as medicine. Red dye No. 2 candies were everywhere in the 1980s, coloring everything from fruit punches to bright red lollipops with a petroleum-based compound called amaranth that nobody questioned. Children lined up at candy counters pointing at the reddest treats they could find, while parents handed over coins without a second thought about what made those colors so vivid. The dye had been used for decades, and manufacturers trusted it completely. Nobody imagined that the brilliant crimson making their favorite candies so appealing could be anything but harmless. But behind closed laboratory doors, researchers were discovering something troubling. Studies on rats showed connections between red dye No. 2 and tumor growth that could not be ignored. When the FDA finally took action in 1976, banning amaranth from American food products, it sent shockwaves through the candy industry. Suddenly, the trusty red coloring that had defined countless childhood treats became contraband. Manufacturers scrambled to reformulate, but the damage to public trust had already begun. Looking back, it feels unsettling to realize how many bright red candies passed through small hands before anyone understood the risk. Trans fat snack cakes and cookies were the darlings of the 1980s snack aisle, wrapped in cellophane and stacked in lunchboxes like treasures waiting to be unwrapped at recess or after school. Cream-filled cakes, chocolate-coated cookies, and frosted pastries lined store shelves in colorful boxes with promises of sweetness that seemed endless and affordable for every family budget. Parents packed them for school lunches, tucked them into picnic baskets, and kept boxes stashed in pantries for after-dinner treats that made everyone smile. What made these snacks so irresistible was partially hydrogenated oil, a substance that gave them an impossibly long shelf life and a texture that felt almost too perfect to be real. Nobody questioned why a cake could sit for months without going stale, or why frosting stayed smooth even after weeks in the cabinet. The truth was that trans fats clogged arteries, raised bad cholesterol, and contributed to heart disease in ways no one fully understood until decades later. When the FDA finally banned artificial trans fats from the food supply entirely, the snack cakes that shaped a generation quietly disappeared from shelves forever. Bringing full-size bottles of liquor through security checkpoints was something travelers did without a second thought in the 1970s, tucking fifths of whiskey into carry-on bags like any other travel essential. Nobody questioned a bottle clinking against toiletries, and security lines moved quickly because inspections were brief and casual. Passengers planned to enjoy drinks mid-flight, share a toast with seatmates, or save money by avoiding the airline's limited bar menu. Duty-free shops sold oversized bottles specifically designed for travelers, and people carried them openly through terminals without raising a single eyebrow. The idea that liquid could pose a threat never crossed anyone's mind. Security focused on metal detectors and quick bag glances rather than scanning every item. Families packed bottles as gifts for relatives waiting at their destination. Today, any liquid over 3.4 ounces triggers immediate confiscation. The rules arrived suddenly after security concerns reshaped every aspect of air travel. Full-size bottles now belong in checked luggage, and the casual days of carrying whatever you pleased have vanished into strict regulations. Unlimited salt shakers on cafeteria tables were as common as napkin dispensers, sitting within arm's reach of every student who wanted to season their food without restriction. Kids grabbed them instinctively, shaking white crystals across mashed potatoes, green beans, and anything else that seemed too bland. No one monitored how much sodium poured out, and no one worried about health consequences hiding in each generous shake. It felt like freedom, like being trusted to make your own choices about how food should taste. Some children turned it into a game, competing to see who could pile the most salt onto a single tray. Lunch aides rarely intervened because seasoning food seemed harmless compared to other mischief students could cause. But those tiny shakers added up. When health researchers began connecting childhood sodium intake to long-term blood pressure problems, school nutrition guidelines changed dramatically. Salt shakers were pulled from tables, and kitchens were required to prepare foods within strict sodium limits. Today, giving students unlimited access to salt seems almost reckless, a relic of an era that trusted children with choices we now understand were never truly safe. Teachers lighting up inside classrooms sounds unbelievable today, but in the 1970s it was as common as chalk dust. Many teachers had ashtrays right on their desks and a lit cigarette balanced between their fingers while they lectured. Smoke curled around overhead projectors, and the air was thick by the end of the day. Students sat quietly, breathing it all in, not daring to complain. Some teachers even used cigarettes as part of their persona, the cool teacher with rolled-up sleeves and a cloud of smoke overhead. It symbolized authority and adulthood, not addiction. Looking back, it is astonishing how normalized it was to fill a room of children with secondhand smoke. What we now call dangerous was once seen as sophistication. The classroom might have been filled with lessons, but the air itself was toxic. Parents in the 1970s wanted their babies to walk sooner, move faster, and explore the world safely. Baby walkers with metal frames seemed like the perfect invention, a sturdy little chariot for curious toddlers. The commercials showed smiling babies zipping around kitchens, their mothers laughing proudly. But reality was far from safe. The metal frames were heavy, the wheels moved too easily, and one wrong push sent babies tumbling downstairs or into sharp corners. Doctors and safety experts warned of the risks, but television ads kept showing picture-perfect homes where babies moved freely and safely. Behind the marketing glow were countless emergency room visits for skull fractures, broken limbs, and concussions. The wheels that symbolized independence also carried children straight into danger at speeds no one anticipated. Emergency rooms filled with injuries that no one saw coming. Pediatricians begged for the product to be rethought, but the market kept booming. It took years for regulations to catch up, and by then, the damage was done. What was supposed to symbolize independence became a silent threat rolling across living room floors. The sound of those tiny wheels once meant joy, but for many families, it ended in fear. Lawn darts were the kind of toy that made parents nervous for good reason. Marketed as a fun family game, they were basically long, heavy darts with pointed metal tips that you tossed into the air toward plastic rings on the ground. The idea was simple: hit the target, score a point, celebrate. The reality, though, was far from safe. Those darts could come down like miniature spears, embedding themselves in lawns, decks, and sometimes people. Families loved playing them at barbecues and backyard gatherings, and most assumed nothing bad could happen, until it did. Hospitals began reporting cases of serious head injuries and even deaths. In one tragic instance, a young boy was struck in the skull, leading to the nationwide outcry that finally got the toy pulled from shelves. Despite being banned, many households kept their sets hidden away, unable to part with the nostalgia. Looking back, it is almost unbelievable that something so lethal was once sold as harmless fun. It was a symbol of a fearless decade when danger and excitement often came in the same package. When a child came home from school with head lice in the 1960s, the treatment was dichlorodiphényl trichloroethane, DDT, dusted directly onto the scalp. School nurses kept canisters of the white powder in their offices. Parents bought it at the hardware store. The same chemical compound that had been sprayed in massive quantities across Pacific battlefields during World War II was now being rubbed into the hair of 6-year-olds, rinsed out over kitchen sinks, and absorbed through the thin skin behind their ears. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring had warned the country about DDT's environmental devastation as early as 1962, and President Kennedy ordered his Science Advisory Committee to investigate. But the chemical stayed legal for human use. The U.S. military quietly removed DDT from its own supply system in 1965 after body lice developed resistance to it. American kids apparently were not given the same consideration. The EPA did not ban DDT until 1972. On summer evenings across rural America, pickup trucks rolled down 2-lane highways with half a dozen kids bouncing around in the open bed, legs dangling over the tailgate. No one questioned it. It was how you got to the swimming hole or your cousin's house 3 towns over. There were no federal restrictions, and most states had no laws against it until the late 1990s. The bed of a pickup offered no restraints, no roll protection, and nothing between a child and the pavement at 55 miles per hour. A sudden stop could send every passenger airborne. What makes this one unsettling is that it still has no comprehensive federal ban. Several states still allow kids to ride in open truck beds, with restrictions varying so wildly that crossing a state line can turn a family outing into a child endangerment charge. Long before a cartoon camel targeted kids, real physicians did the selling on camera. Throughout the 50s and 60s, cigarette companies ran television spots featuring doctors who endorsed their brands by name. Camel asked viewers to consider that more doctors smoked Camels than any other cigarette, a claim the company manufactured by handing free cartons to physicians at medical conventions and then surveying them on their preferences. Chesterfield cited expert findings in 1953 that claimed smoking had no adverse effect on the nose, throat, or sinuses. Morton Levin had published his study linking smoking to lung cancer 3 years earlier. By the mid-'80s, tobacco companies spent over $2 billion a year on promotion. The practice of using doctors as pitchmen for lethal products was never formally outlawed. It simply became too indefensible to continue. Fondue restaurants with open flame pots at every table captured the spirit of the 1970s perfectly, inviting diners to gather around bubbling cheese or hot oil while managing their own tabletop burners without supervision. Guests adjusted fuel levels, leaned over flames to dip bread or meat, and sometimes knocked pots sideways in the excitement of communal cooking. The flames danced just inches from napkins, sleeves, and long hair that hung dangerously close during enthusiastic reaching. Restaurants handed over the cooking responsibility entirely, trusting customers to handle fire safely despite having no training with open fuel sources. Children participated eagerly, waving fondue forks near flames that could easily catch stray clothing or splash hot oil. People saw it as interactive, romantic, and wonderfully modern, never stopping to consider how quickly things could go wrong. Today, fire codes and liability concerns have dramatically changed how fondue is served, with many restaurants switching to electric warmers or limiting open flames to controlled kitchen areas. The freewheeling tabletop fires of the 70s are now viewed as hazards rather than charming entertainment. Before 1977, shower doors and tub enclosures were not required to use tempered glass. Standard annealed glass, the same brittle material found in picture frames, was installed in bathrooms across the country. When it broke, it did not crumble into small, blunt pieces. It shattered into long, razor-edged shards capable of slicing through skin on contact. In a shower, where you are wet, barefoot, and unclothed, a fall against an annealed glass panel was a serious emergency. The CPSC issued its safety standard for architectural glazing materials in 1977, requiring tempered or laminated safety glass in hazardous locations, including showers and bathtubs. Tempered glass is 4 to 5 times stronger and breaks into small, relatively dull cubes instead of jagged blades. But the standard only applied to new installations. Older bathrooms with original annealed panels were grandfathered in, and many stayed that way well into the 90s, waiting for a slip, a stumble, or a child playing too rough to turn a morning shower into something far worse. Cereals colored with red dye number 2 were some of the most visually striking boxes on grocery store shelves throughout the 1980s, drawing children's eyes with their brilliant fruity shades and promises of wild berry flavor. The dye made everything look more exciting, from the cereal pieces themselves to the cartoon mascots printed on the packaging. Families poured bowl after bowl without any idea that the vivid color came from a chemical flagged by researchers for its connection to cancer. The ban had technically arrived in 1976, but older inventory meant some products continued appearing on shelves into the early 80s. Parents trusted brand names and colorful packaging, never thinking to study the ingredient list. Kids reached for these cereals because they looked like candy, and nobody warned them otherwise. Regulators moved slowly, leaving families exposed to something that should have disappeared much sooner. It is unsettling to realize that the bright red and pink hues we associated with fun were quietly tied to a substance the government declared too dangerous to swallow. Red dye number 2 was the vibrant secret behind countless foods that defined the 1970s, giving maraschino cherries their glossy crimson shine, making fruit punch glow like liquid candy, and turning ordinary snacks into eye-catching treats. Food manufacturers loved it because the color was intense, stable, and cheap, perfect for making processed products look fresher than they were. Grocery store shelves burst with red-tinted foods, and families consumed them daily without questioning what created such vivid hues. But laboratory studies began revealing troubling results. Researchers found that high doses caused tumors in rats, sparking debate about whether the same risks applied to humans. Consumer advocates demanded action, while industry representatives insisted the evidence was inconclusive. The controversy grew until regulators finally banned red dye number 2 from all food and cosmetic products, citing the precautionary principle that potential carcinogens had no place in the food supply. The ban shocked manufacturers who scrambled to reformulate recipes overnight, and shoppers noticed their favorite red foods suddenly looked different. Lucas acidified candy powder was the intensely sour Mexican treat that became a schoolyard sensation during the 1980s and 90s, passed between children who dared each other to withstand its tongue-scorching bite. The powder came in small containers that kids would pour directly onto their tongues, competing to see who could handle the most without wincing. The chili lime flavor was unlike anything American candy offered, and children from border states introduced their friends to this exotic import with evangelical enthusiasm. What nobody realized was that the traditional chili powder coating contained dangerous levels of lead. The contamination came from multiple sources, including the soil where peppers were grown, the equipment used during processing, and the storage containers that held ingredients. When the FDA finally tested these candies and discovered lead levels far exceeding safety limits, the recall was immediate and sweeping. Stores pulled Lucas products from shelves, and health officials warned parents to throw away any remaining candy. The beloved powder that had made so many taste buds tingle became a cautionary tale about contamination hiding in traditional recipes. Potassium bromate. Bread and rolls sat in every kitchen bread box in the 1980s, sliced thick for sandwiches and toasted golden for breakfast every morning of the week. Families trusted these loaves without hesitation, spreading butter and jam across surfaces so soft they felt almost cloud-like beneath the knife. Bakeries and commercial bread companies loved potassium bromate because it made dough rise higher, created a finer crumb texture, and produced a finished product that looked bakery perfect every time it came out of the oven. Nobody asked what made the bread so impossibly fluffy or why it held together so well during slicing when homemade loaves crumbled at the slightest touch. The secret ingredient was a dough conditioner that researchers would later classify as a probable carcinogen after years of mounting evidence. Studies linked potassium bromate to kidney damage and tumor growth, especially when bread was not baked at high enough temperatures to break down the chemical completely. When countries around the world began banning it from their food supplies, American families were stunned to learn that their morning toast had carried risks nobody discussed at the table. Walking around freely during takeoff and landing was something passengers did without much concern in the 1970s, treating the cabin like a living room where movement was a personal choice. People stood to grab items from overhead bins, stretched their legs in the aisle, and chatted with friends seated rows away while the plane climbed or descended. Flight attendants reminded travelers to sit, but enforcement was gentle, almost apologetic. Parents let children wander to visit relatives in other sections, and businessmen stood adjusting luggage even as the wheels left the runway. The aircraft shook and tilted, yet passengers seemed unbothered by the physics of flight that made standing dangerous. Pilots made announcements about seatbelts, but the tone suggested suggestions rather than commands. It was an era of personal responsibility, where individuals decided their own comfort and risk. Today, seatbelt signs mean exactly what they say. Flight attendants enforce compliance firmly, and anyone refusing to sit faces consequences ranging from warnings to removal from future flights. The casual strolls that once felt harmless have been redefined as safety violations. Full sugar chocolate pudding cups were the crown jewels of the cafeteria dessert section, small plastic containers filled with smooth sweetness that made even the worst lunch days feel survivable. Kids peeled back the foil lids with anticipation, sometimes licking them clean before diving into the pudding with plastic spoons that bent under the pressure of eager scooping. The chocolate flavor was intense and unapologetically sweet, the kind of dessert that coated your tongue and lingered long after the last bite. Schools offered them freely, sometimes encouraging seconds for students who finished their main courses. Parents saw pudding as a harmless treat, something that made children happy without causing obvious harm. But those little cups contained far more sugar than anyone realized, packed into servings that exceeded what modern nutritionists consider safe for a single meal. When federal guidelines began restricting added sugars in school meals, chocolate pudding cups became one of the first casualties. The versions available today are reformulated with artificial sweeteners or reduced sugar content that changes the taste entirely. For anyone who remembers the original, the difference is clear. In the 1970s, teenage pregnancy was not seen as a challenge to support. It was a problem to remove. Pregnant students were often forced out of school, told they would set a bad example. Some were sent to secret special schools, while others simply disappeared from classrooms one day. Administrators claimed it was to protect the school's reputation, not the student's future. Friends would whisper, teachers would avoid the subject, and an entire chapter of a young woman's life would be erased under the word shame. These girls were denied the right to graduate alongside their classmates or to continue their studies at all. The idea that motherhood and education could coexist was unthinkable to many at the time. It was a cold reflection of how society valued appearances more than compassion. Looking back, this rule did more than hide pregnancies. It hid humanity. In the 1970s, a bright coat of paint was seen as the quickest way to freshen up a home. The walls glistened with color, the nursery looked cheerful, and even wooden toys were coated in glossy perfection. What no one realized was that beauty came with a cost, a quiet, invisible danger hiding in plain sight. Lead-based paint was everywhere, from cribs to kitchen walls, sold as durable and easy to clean. Families trusted it, unaware that each chip and flake released toxic dust that lingered in the air and settled on everything. Children, drawn to the bright colors, often ingested it without anyone knowing. By the time doctors began connecting developmental problems to lead exposure, millions of homes were already covered in the stuff. It took decades for regulations to catch up, and even then, the damage was done. This was the kind of danger that did not explode or burn, it simply stayed. poisoning quietly. Looking back now, it is haunting how something so ordinary became one of the most dangerous household hazards of its time. The Easy Bake Oven of the 1980s felt like pure independence in a box. With a tiny light bulb acting as the heat source, kids could bake small cakes and cookies all by themselves. It was marketed as a way to feel grown up, and it worked, maybe too well. Many kids used the oven to experiment, tossing in candy bars, crayons, or whatever was in the pantry just to see what would happen. The smell that filled the room was equal parts sugar and smoke, and parents would come running only to find melted chaos inside. Some kids even charged friends a few cents to taste test their creations, proudly serving up burned chocolate and half-cooked dough. The problem was, those little ovens could get dangerously hot. Thousands of children burned their fingers or hands trying to pull out the metal pans, and some even ended up with serious blisters. There were no automatic shutoffs, and the compact design trapped heat in ways no one expected. Parents quickly realized the toy was more hazard than hobby. Later versions introduced safety doors and cooler heating elements, but by then, the damage to its reputation was done. The 1980s model still holds a nostalgic place in many hearts, but it also taught an entire generation a hard lesson. Sometimes being just like mom comes with a price. If the diet pills kept you wired during the day, the barbiturates were supposed to bring you down at night. Phenobarbital was the drug your family doctor prescribed for everything that could not be diagnosed: exam anxiety, wedding day nerves, a rough patch in a marriage, trouble sleeping after a move. It was a powerful central nervous system depressant, a drug now classified as a Schedule IV controlled substance and reserved almost exclusively for epilepsy treatment. But in the 1960s, a general practitioner could write you a prescription in under 2 minutes and send you home with a bottle of 60 tablets. The therapeutic dose and the lethal dose were not far apart, and mixing phenobarbital with alcohol, which millions of Americans did every evening, narrowed that gap to almost nothing. Overdose deaths were so common, they barely made the local papers. If the schoolyard paddle seems hard to believe, consider what happened after the final bell. In the early 1980s, a 17-year-old in many states could walk into a bar, order a beer, and drink it legally. The legal drinking age was 18, 19, or 20 in dozens of states, a patchwork left over from the Vietnam-era argument that if you were old enough to be drafted, you were old enough to drink. The consequence was a generation of teenagers behind the wheel after nights at bars and keg parties with no legal barrier between them and the highway. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, founded in 1980, pushed relentlessly for change. The National Minimum Drinking Age Act, signed by President Reagan on July 17, 1984, threatened to withhold 10% of federal highway funding from any state that refused to raise its age to 21. South Dakota and Wyoming held out until 1988. The law has been credited with saving over 18,000 lives. They called them rainbow diet pills because of their bright, candy-like colors, and for decades they were marketed as a simple solution for weight loss. What the ads left out was that the pills combined amphetamines with diuretics, laxatives, thyroid hormones, and barbiturates, a chemical cocktail that forced the body into shedding weight at any cost. Dispensing diet doctors built fortunes on the practice, one paying $71 for 100,000 amphetamine tablets and reselling them for $12,000. By 1970, roughly 10 million Americans were taking some form of prescription stimulant. The FDA pulled the original pills after dozens of deaths, but 80s television continued running weight loss ads with fabricated before and after photos and paid performers posing as satisfied customers. The FTC found that nearly 40% of those ads contained claims that were almost certainly false. Restaurants without accessible entrances or restrooms were simply the norm in the 1970s, designed without a single thought for customers who used wheelchairs, walkers, or any mobility assistance. Steps led up to front doors, narrow aisles wound between tightly packed tables, and restrooms hid behind heavy doors at the end of cramped hallways. People with disabilities were often told to wait outside while companions fetched takeout, or they avoided dining out altogether. Owners saw no reason to change layouts that had worked for decades, viewing accessibility as an unnecessary expense rather than a basic right. Families with disabled members learned which restaurants to avoid, passing that knowledge quietly like a secret map of exclusion. The idea that a business should welcome everyone equally had not yet taken hold, and regulations did not exist to force the issue. Today, the Americans with Disabilities Act requires ramps, wide doorways, accessible seating, and compliant restrooms in every restaurant. The dining rooms that once locked out entire segments of the population have been redesigned, rebuilt, or shut down for failing to meet standards that seemed radical in the 70s. Homes built before 1962 had standard two-prong electrical outlets in the bathroom, mounted on the wall within arm's reach of the sink and the tub. A grounding wire provides a safe path for stray current to return to the panel instead of passing through a human body. Without that wire, a short circuit in any appliance, a razor, a radio, a heat lamp, sent the current looking for the nearest ground, which in a wet bathroom was often the person standing on damp tile or touching a metal faucet. Many older homes also lacked a dedicated bathroom circuit. The outlets shared wiring with bedrooms and hallways, increasing the load and the risk of overheating at every connection point. These two-prong outlets were never banned. The National Electrical Code required grounded three-prong receptacles in new construction, but millions of older bathrooms kept their original wiring for decades. No federal mandate has ever required homeowners to replace existing ungrounded outlets unless a renovation triggers a code compliance inspection. Cereals with lead-soldered packaging seams were silently contaminating breakfast tables in ways that nobody could see, smell, or taste. The metal seams that sealed certain cereal bag liners contained lead solder, a material that seemed perfectly safe to manufacturers focused on keeping products fresh and airtight. Nobody thought about what happened when acidic or moisture-rich foods sat against those seams for weeks at a time. Lead slowly migrated into the product, invisible particles drifting into flakes and clusters that children spooned into their mouths every morning. Families trusted packaging the way they trusted the food inside it, never imagining that the container itself could be the source of harm. Scientists eventually traced unexpected lead exposure back to food packaging, prompting bans and redesigns that arrived far too late for the families already affected. The cereals themselves were not the problem. The way they were stored and sealed was quietly introducing a heavy metal into homes that prided themselves on healthy breakfasts. Today, packaging standards have changed dramatically, but the memory of lead hiding in plain sight remains one of the most unsettling revelations of that era. Aerosol CFC hairsprays were the glamorous secret weapon of the 1970s, sold in sleek cans that promised salon-quality hold with nothing more than the press of a button. Women loved the convenience and the way their hairstyles could defy gravity for an entire day. Bathrooms filled with that familiar hissing sound every morning, clouds of fine mist settling on mirrors and counters. The propellant inside those cans was chlorofluorocarbon, a chemical so stable that scientists once considered it harmless. But that same stability meant CFCs drifted unchanged into the upper atmosphere, where they began quietly shredding the ozone layer that protected the planet from dangerous ultraviolet radiation. Nobody spraying their hair imagined they were contributing to a global environmental crisis, yet millions of tiny bursts added up to devastating consequences. When researchers discovered the growing hole in the ozone, bans rolled out internationally, and the aerosol industry scrambled to reformulate. Today, those old CFC cans are illegal to manufacture or possess, a reminder that convenience sometimes carries a cost the whole world pays. Thyroid hormones prescribed to healthy dieters were one of the strangest medical shortcuts of the 1970s, a practice that now seems almost unbelievable. Doctors discovered that patients with underactive thyroids lost weight rapidly once they started hormone replacement. And somewhere along the way, someone decided to try the same approach on people whose thyroids worked perfectly fine. Prescriptions flowed freely, handed to women who complained about stubborn pounds and men who wanted to trim waistlines without exercise. People swallowed these powerful hormones daily, never realizing they were throwing their endocrine systems into chaos. Hearts beat faster than they should, bones weakened from accelerated calcium loss, and natural thyroid function began shutting down because the body no longer needed to produce its own hormones. The damage often revealed itself years later, long after the dieting stopped. Regulators eventually made it illegal to prescribe thyroid hormones to patients without a legitimate deficiency. But for those who trusted their doctors during the 70s, the consequences sometimes lasted a lifetime. Toxic waste. Nuclear sludge candy bars sounded dangerous because they were supposed to, marketed with radioactive symbols and edgy packaging that appealed to children who loved anything extreme. The cherry-flavored version became particularly popular, with its sour punch and rebellious branding, making kids feel like they were getting away with something forbidden. Nobody expected the name to prove prophetic in the worst possible way. In 2011, California health officials discovered that toxic waste nuclear sludge bars contained lead levels exceeding state safety standards. The contamination traced back to ingredients sourced from Pakistan, where quality controls had failed to catch the heavy metal presence. The recall was swift, pulling the cherry-flavored bars from shelves across the country. Parents who had laughed at the ironic branding suddenly found nothing funny about genuine toxicity hiding inside their children's favorite candy. The incident demonstrated how global supply chains could introduce dangers that domestic manufacturers never anticipated. The toxic waste brand survived, but the nuclear sludge bars carrying lead became a permanent stain on extreme candy history. Brominated vegetable oil citrus drinks were a refrigerator staple in the 1980s, filling glasses at kitchen tables across the nation with their fizzy orange and lemon-lime flavors. Families gulped down these sodas without hesitation, trusting that a beverage sold by the millions must be perfectly safe. The bubbles sparkled, the citrus flavor tasted refreshing, and nobody asked what kept the fruit flavoring evenly distributed throughout the bottle. The answer was brominated vegetable oil, a chemical compound also used as a flame retardant in industrial settings. This additive prevented fruit flavors from floating to the top, but it also accumulated in body tissues with repeated consumption. Studies began linking it to skin rashes, memory problems, and neurological concerns that took years to surface fully. When regulators finally banned brominated vegetable oil from beverages, families were stunned to learn that their favorite refreshment had been quietly introducing a fire suppressant into their systems. The drinks that once quenched summer thirst became a cautionary tale about hidden industrial chemicals disguised as everyday refreshments. Carrying knives and sharp objects in carry-on bags was completely unremarkable in the 1970s, when pocket knives were considered practical tools rather than potential threats. Business travelers kept small blades tucked beside pens and notepads, using them to open packages or cut loose threads. Families packed Swiss Army knives for camping trips, tossing them into bags without worrying whether security might object. The idea that someone could weaponize an everyday tool felt distant and almost paranoid. Inspectors glanced at bags quickly, waving travelers through with minimal fuss because the focus was keeping lines moving rather than examining every item. Nail clippers, scissors, and letter openers passed through checkpoints alongside the knives without anyone blinking. People carried what they needed, trusting that fellow passengers posed no danger. The atmosphere felt relaxed, almost neighborly. Today, even the smallest blade triggers alarms and confiscation. Travelers learn quickly to leave sharp objects at home or face having them seized forever. The shift happened fast, driven by events that made the world rethink what belonged inside an aircraft cabin. Full-fat cheese-smothering nachos and pizza was one of the great pleasures of 80s school lunches, thick orange layers that stretched and pulled with every bite. Pizza day meant rectangles of dough buried under blankets of melted cheese glistening under heat lamps, while nacho day brought mountains of chips covered in warm cheese sauce dripping from every edge. Kids devoured these meals without a thought about fat content or dietary consequences. Cheese was simply delicious, a food group unto itself that made everything taste better. Schools served it generously because children actually ate their lunches when cheese was involved, solving the problem of wasted food and hungry afternoon students. The cheese came from massive blocks or industrial bags, measured by the handful rather than the ounce. But full-fat dairy carried more saturated fat than nutritionists eventually deemed acceptable for growing children. When federal guidelines restricted the types of cheese schools could serve, cafeterias switched to reduced-fat versions that melted differently and tasted less rich. Students today eat pizza and nachos that look similar but lack the indulgent quality that made those meals legendary. Fashion was rebellion in the 1970s, and for girls, something as simple as wearing pants could get them sent home. Many schools enforced strict dress codes requiring dresses or skirts below the knee. Jeans, slacks, or anything resembling male clothing were banned in the name of modesty. A girl wearing pants was often called disrespectful, even immoral. Yet it was also an era when women were fighting for equal rights outside the classroom, and school dress codes became a quiet battleground for that same fight. Some girls refused to change, others were suspended, and a few made local headlines for challenging the rules. When these codes finally started to fall away, it was not because schools suddenly became modern. It was because students refused to back down. What was once labeled inappropriate became a symbol of progress. Polyester was the fabric of the future, shiny, smooth, and effortlessly modern. In the 1970s, it covered everything from clothing to home decor. When polyester curtains hit the market, homeowners fell in love. They looked elegant, never needed ironing, and came in every color imaginable. But there was a hidden problem. Polyester burns fast and hot. A single spark from a candle, a brush against a space heater, or even a cigarette could turn them into a sheet of fire. Magazines called them the miracle of modern fibers, celebrating their durability and low maintenance, but left out the fact that once they caught fire, they melted onto skin. The chemical smell of burning polyester haunted firefighters and emergency rooms alike. It was fashion and function turned fatal under the glow of a single match. Reports of sudden household blazes started surfacing, each one eerily similar. The wrinkle-free revolution had quietly introduced a new kind of danger. Yet companies rarely mentioned that part in their glossy catalogs. People wanted convenience, and they got it, along with a risk they never saw coming. Polyester promised glamour but delivered flames. It is chilling to think how many living rooms glowed with more than just style. The Cabbage Patch Snack Time Kids doll was designed to be cute, interactive, and surprisingly hungry. Kids could feed it pretend snacks that disappeared into its mechanical mouth as the doll chewed with a quiet whirring sound. At first, it felt like magic, a toy that could eat on its own. But that magic quickly turned into horror for many children. The doll's motorized mouth had no off switch, and it did not know the difference between plastic food and real fingers. Countless kids learned that the hard way, getting their hair or fingertips caught in the doll's relentless jaws. Parents rushed to pull the batteries, but even that sometimes did not stop it. The manufacturer recalled the dolls after several injuries, but not before the Snack Time Kids had earned a spot in toy history for all the wrong reasons. Despite its creepy legacy, some collectors still keep them. A strange reminder of how wild 1980s toy innovation could be. The idea of a doll that eats might sound innocent, but when it starts chewing on you, the fun ends fast. Long before infant acetaminophen existed, mothers kept a small brown bottle of paregoric on the shelf beside the baby formula. It was a camphorated tincture of opium containing morphine, anise oil, and benzoic acid, and it was sold without a prescription in pharmacies across the country. Doctors recommended it for teething pain, infant colic, diarrhea, and fussy sleeping. The dosage instructions printed right on the label included infants as young as 5 days old. A single ounce contained roughly 13 milligrams of morphine. Parents rubbed it on swollen gums, mixed it into bottles, and spooned it directly into tiny mouths without a second thought, because their own pediatrician had told them to. It took until 1970 for the federal government to reclassify paregoric under the Controlled Substances Act, finally requiring a prescription. By then, generations of American babies had been dosed with opium before they could walk. Every kid in the 1980s owned a bicycle, and almost none of them owned a helmet. You rode to school, to the arcade, to the creek and back with nothing between your skull and the asphalt, but a bad haircut and good luck. The modern bicycle helmet was not introduced until 1975, and fewer than 5% of child cyclists wore one throughout the decade. No state required helmet use for kids until California passed a limited law in 1987 covering only passengers under 5. The CPSC estimated that 50,000 children under 15 suffered serious head injuries from bicycle accidents every year. New Jersey became the first state to require helmets for all child cyclists in 1992, and fatalities in the state dropped from 10 to 2 in the first full year. Bud Light debuted Spuds MacKenzie during Super Bowl 21 in 1987, and within months, over 200 officially licensed products flooded the market, including plush stuffed animals that ended up in kids' bedrooms across America. The real dog was a female bull terrier named Honey Tree Evil Eye from North Riverside, Illinois. Senator Strom Thurmond stood on the Senate floor holding a Spuds plush, accusing Anheuser-Busch of using the mascot to glamorize drinking for kids. Mothers Against Drunk Driving filed their own accusations. Schools banned students from wearing Spuds apparel because it carried a beer brand logo. Christmas ads featuring the dog dressed as Santa were pulled in Ohio, where state law prohibited alcohol advertising using Santa's likeness. Bud Light credited the campaign with a 20% sales boost, but retired the mascot in 1989. Smoking sections separated only by a sign or a half wall were once considered the polite compromise between smokers and non-smokers in the 1970s. Families sat down to dinner just a few feet away from tables clouded in cigarette haze, trusting that an invisible barrier somehow protected them from drifting smoke. Restaurants placed small signs on posts or roped off corners with decorative partitions that did absolutely nothing to stop the smell or the particles floating through the air. Waitresses carried trays past ashtrays overflowing with crushed butts, and nobody batted an eye because this was simply how dining worked. Children ate their meals while adults at nearby tables lit up between courses, filling the room with fog that clung to hair and clothes long after the check was paid. People genuinely believed that sitting in the non-smoking section meant breathing clean air, even when the smoke visibly curled over the divider. Today, indoor smoking in restaurants is banned almost everywhere, and the idea of lighting a cigarette near someone else's dinner seems completely unthinkable to modern diners. Every copper pipe joint in a 1970s bathroom was sealed with solder that contained up to 50% lead by weight. The plumber melted it with a torch, smoothed it with a rag, and moved to the next fitting. That solder sat in direct contact with the water flowing to your sink, your bathtub, and your shower head, leaching lead into every drop that passed through. Hot water accelerated the process, which meant the shower and the bath were the worst exposure points in the house. For children, even low concentrations of lead in water were linked to developmental delays, learning disabilities, and behavioral problems. Congress did not ban lead solder in residential plumbing until 1986 through an amendment to the Safe Drinking Water Act. Even then, the law defined lead-free as up to 8% lead content in fittings. That threshold was not reduced to 0.25% until 2011. For over a decade after the ban, the plumbing industry was still allowed to install fittings that leached lead into your family's water. Cereals preserved with unregulated BHA levels were quietly sitting in pantries across America throughout the 1980s, their freshness protected by a chemical that would later become one of the most debated food additives in history. Butylated hydroxyanisole kept fats from going rancid, extending shelf life in ways that made mass production profitable and convenient. Families appreciated that their cereal stayed crispy for weeks without developing strange tastes or smells. Nobody thought twice about an ingredient listed in tiny print that sounded scientific and harmless, but researchers in Europe and Japan began raising serious questions about whether BHA might be carcinogenic, especially at levels that accumulated through daily consumption. The United States allowed far higher concentrations than other countries, and parents had no way of knowing they were feeding their children something regulators elsewhere had restricted. Looking back, it is troubling to realize how casually these preservatives entered the food supply and how long it took for anyone to demand better oversight. The cereal stayed fresh, but the questions about what it cost lingered much longer. Tris BP Flame Retardant Sleepwear was marketed as every parent's dream come true. Pajamas treated with chemicals that could resist flames and potentially save a child's life during a house fire. The thought of added protection while children slept gave families peace of mind, and sales exploded. Manufacturers proudly displayed flame-retardant labels, and parents paid premium prices believing they were investing in their children's safety. The fabric felt slightly stiffer, but that seemed like a small trade for such important protection. What nobody knew was that Tris BP did not stay locked in the fabric. The chemical leached out with every wash, every tumble in the dryer, and every night spent pressed against a child's skin. Studies revealed that Tris BP caused genetic mutations in laboratory tests, raising terrifying questions about what it might do to developing bodies. When researchers connected the dots, the ban came swiftly. Millions of pajamas were pulled from shelves, leaving parents stunned that something designed to protect their children had instead exposed them to a substance now classified as a probable carcinogen. Amphetamine diet pills sold over the counter were once as easy to find as aspirin, sitting on pharmacy shelves and tucked inside purses of women who wanted nothing more than to fit into last year's dress. In the 1970s, doctors handed out prescriptions freely, and drugstores sold milder versions without any prescription at all. People trusted these pills because they worked fast, killing appetite and flooding the body with energy that made every task feel easier. Housewives popped them before breakfast, secretaries took them during lunch, and teenagers swallowed them before dances without understanding what they were putting into their systems. The pills were amphetamines, the same chemical family as street speed, but wrapped in respectable packaging. Nobody talked about addiction, heart strain, or the crashes that followed. It took years of mounting medical evidence before regulators reclassified these stimulants as controlled substances and pulled the over-the-counter versions from shelves. Today, possessing them without a prescription is a criminal offense, but for an entire generation, they were the secret weapon hiding in every medicine cabinet. Candy cigarettes were the ultimate forbidden thrill packaged in the most innocent wrapper imaginable, sold right beside real tobacco products in every corner store and gas station during the 1980s. Children loved pretending to smoke these chalky sugar sticks, mimicking the adults they saw in movies, on television, and in their own living rooms. The packaging copied real cigarette brands so closely that a child could feel genuinely grown up while puffing pretend smoke into the cold winter air. Parents bought them without hesitation because candy was candy, and what harm could sugar possibly do? Nobody talked about the psychological conditioning happening with every fake drag, the way children were being trained to associate cigarettes with sweetness and fun. Health advocates eventually raised alarms about these products normalizing smoking behavior at a dangerously young age. Multiple countries moved to ban candy cigarettes entirely, removing them from shelves and prohibiting their sale to minors. Some American states followed with their own restrictions. Today, those innocent-looking packages represent a disturbing chapter in candy history, where marketing targeted children in ways we now recognize as harmful. Sassafras root beer barrels were the old-fashioned treats that grandparents kept in crystal dishes and corner stores sold by the handful in the 1980s, carrying a sense of tradition that made them feel timeless and safe. The flavor was unmistakable, earthy and sweet with a hint of something herbal that made it taste like no other candy on the shelf. Kids loved unwrapping the crinkly cellophane and letting the hard candy dissolve slowly on their tongues while that distinctive root beer flavor spread warmth through every taste bud. What nobody realized was that the traditional sassafras flavoring came from saffrole, a compound researchers had already linked to liver damage and cancer in laboratory studies. The same ingredient that made these candies taste authentically old-fashioned also posed serious health risks with repeated exposure over time. When regulators banned saffrole from food products entirely, the original root beer barrel recipe vanished almost overnight from store shelves. Candy makers scrambled to reformulate their recipes using artificial flavors, and the treats that remain today taste different enough that anyone who remembers the originals can tell immediately. Walking into the cockpit to visit the pilots mid-flight was one of those magical experiences children talked about for years afterward, clutching plastic wings pinned to their shirts like badges of honor. In the 1970s, cockpit doors stayed unlocked and sometimes wide open, inviting curious passengers to peek inside at glowing instruments and switches. Parents encouraged their kids to walk up and say hello, and pilots welcomed the company, showing off altitude gauges and explaining what each dial controlled. Some children even sat in the jump seat, watching clouds part below while the captain pointed out landmarks. It was an era when trust between passengers and crew felt natural, when the idea of someone dangerous boarding a plane seemed far-fetched. Flight attendants smiled as families lined up for photos beside uniformed pilots who seemed genuinely happy to share their workspace. Today, that same door is reinforced with steel, locked from the inside, and protected by federal law. The friendly visits that once made flying feel personal have been replaced by barriers designed to keep everyone firmly in their place. Pink slime meat fillers in ground beef were one of the cafeteria secrets that nobody talked about because nobody even knew they existed. The hamburgers and taco meat that children ate throughout the 1980s contained something called lean, finely textured beef, a product made from scraps and trimmings, spun in centrifuges and treated with ammonia to kill bacteria. It stretched the meat supply, lowered costs, and allowed schools to serve more students with smaller budgets. Kids bit into burgers believing they were eating real ground beef, never imagining that a portion came from processed leftovers that barely resembled meat. The texture blended in perfectly, masked by ketchup, mustard, and whatever else children piled on top. For years, this filler moved through school kitchens without question. But when journalists and food safety advocates exposed the practice, the public reaction was fierce. Parents demanded transparency, regulators tightened requirements, and pink slime was eventually banned from school cafeterias nationwide. Today, ground beef served to students must meet stricter standards that leave no room for the mystery fillers that once stretched every serving. Corporal punishment was not just allowed in the 1970s, it was expected. Teachers and principals kept wooden paddles hanging behind their desks, ready for anyone who talked back, forgot homework, or got caught chewing gum. One wrong move could mean a trip to the office where a wooden board, sometimes with holes drilled in it to make the sting worse, would be used in front of other students. Parents rarely objected, and most schools saw it as building character. Students learned early that fear kept order more than respect did. The sound of a paddle striking wood or desk was enough to quiet a whole hallway. Many adults who went to school then still remember that mix of embarrassment, fear, and anger, not the lesson that came after. Looking back now, it is hard to believe this was ever called discipline. It was control disguised as morality, and it left a generation who learned more about silence than self-expression. In the mid-1970s, energy efficiency was the new American dream. People wanted homes that stayed warm in winter and cool in summer without wasting money. That dream led to formaldehyde foam insulation, hailed as a cheap, cutting-edge solution. Contractors sprayed it into walls like miracle foam, sealing gaps in minutes. At first, homeowners were thrilled. Their houses felt warmer, the bills were smaller, and the air smelled faintly of newness. Then came the headaches, burning eyes, and nausea. The culprit? Toxic formaldehyde gas leaking into every room. What started as progress turned into panic. Families opened windows in the dead of winter, desperate for clean air while government agencies scrambled to investigate. The foam was eventually banned, but its smell lingered in memory, a sharp reminder of how easily safety could be sold as innovation. The insulation meant to protect families instead turned their homes into slow, suffocating traps. The He-Man power sword turned every backyard into a battlefield. Inspired by the cartoon hero himself, the hard plastic sword was big, bright, and built for action. Every child who held it shouted, "I have the power!" usually before whacking a sibling or neighbor. There was a kind of magic in that sword, especially when paired with the He-Man action figures and Saturday morning reruns. Kids wore makeshift capes made from bath towels and staged epic battles in the yard, believing they were saving the universe. Of course, those heroic duels often ended with someone crying, a broken toy, and a lecture from an exhausted parent. The sword's tough design meant it could take a beating, but that also meant it delivered one. Black eyes, bruised arms, and a few broken lamps later, parents started realizing this toy might have been too realistic. The problem was not just the sword, it was the energy it unleashed in every kid who wielded it. The toy was eventually reworked with softer plastic, but by then, countless kids had already discovered their inner warrior and their parents' limits for patience. It remains one of the most iconic but dangerous toy weapons of the decade, symbolizing both the imagination and chaos that defined 1980s playtime. Your mother's obstetrician may have told her to smoke. That is not an exaggeration. Throughout the 1960s, doctors advised pregnant women that a cigarette could calm their nerves, ease nausea, and help control excessive weight gain. Tobacco companies ran advertisements featuring physicians in white coats endorsing specific brands, and medical journals accepted full-page ads from cigarette manufacturers without hesitation. The 1964 Surgeon General's report linked smoking to lung cancer, but said almost nothing about pregnancy. Hospitals had ashtrays in maternity wards. Nurses smoked at their stations. Millions of women smoked through all 9 months because the person they trusted most, their doctor, never told them to stop. If you grew up in the 1980s, you probably remember climbing into the back seat of your family car and sprawling across the vinyl bench without a seatbelt in sight. Some kids rode up front on a parent's knee or curled up on the rear window shelf like a cat in the sun. Seatbelt use among Americans hovered between 11% and 14% in the early 1980s, and most families treated the lap belt as an optional decoration. Tennessee became the first state to pass a child restraint law in 1978, but enforcement was almost non-existent. It took until 1985 for all 50 states to require car seats, and even then, surveys found 65% of parents were installing them wrong. The restraints offered little more than a padded shelf and a flimsy buckle. A sudden stop at 30 miles per hour turned an unrestrained child into a projectile, and the dashboard was solid steel with no give. R.J. Reynolds introduced Joe Camel to American audiences in 1988 as part of Camel's 75th anniversary campaign, and within 3 years, the cartoon mascot had become one of the most recognized advertising characters in the country. A 1991 study in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that 6-year-olds identified Joe Camel at the same rate they recognized the Disney Channel logo, over 90% recognition in both cases. The character wore sunglasses, played pool, and appeared on t-shirts and baseball caps bundled with cigarette purchases. Internal Reynolds documents from 1984 showed employees had identified the need to attract younger smokers, including those buying their first regular brand. The FTC filed a formal complaint in 1997 for unfair practices. Reynolds paid $10 million to settle with California, and the 1998 Master Settlement Agreement banned cartoon characters from cigarette advertising entirely. Flambeed desserts performed without fire. Safety measures were the sparkling finale to countless dinners in the 1970s, when waiters carried pans of liquor-soaked fruit right to your table and set them ablaze with theatrical confidence. The flames leaped high, casting warm orange light across delighted diners who leaned in close to watch the show. Restaurants saw these performances as marks of sophistication. Nobody checked whether the tablecloth was fire-resistant, whether the ceiling was high enough, or whether the server had any formal training beyond watching someone else do it. Families gathered as cherries Jubilee or bananas Foster erupted in controlled bursts of fire inches from their hair and flammable clothing. The smell of caramelized sugar and burning alcohol filled the room, and everyone applauded when the flames died down. Today, fire codes and insurance companies have made these performances far more complicated, requiring permits, extinguishers, and safety protocols that strip much of the spontaneity away. The idea of an untrained waiter igniting alcohol near seated guests now seems reckless, but back then it was simply dinner with a show. Before 1975, not a single electrical outlet in your bathroom was required to have ground fault circuit interrupter protection. The outlets had 2 flat slots, no test button, no reset, and no ability to detect a lethal current leak. If a plugged-in hairdryer fell into a filled bathtub, nothing stood between the electricity and the person sitting in it. A study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association documented at least 95 bathtub electrocution deaths in the United States between 1979 and 1982. Hairdryers were responsible for 60% of those deaths, and kids under 5 had the highest mortality rate. The National Electrical Code did not mandate GFCI outlets in bathrooms until its 1975 edition, and many local jurisdictions took years to adopt the standard. The Electrical Safety Foundation later estimated that GFCI technology cut home electrocution deaths in half. Cereals sweetened with cyclamate offered a calorie-free sweetness that seemed almost too good to be true in an era obsessed with convenience and flavor. This artificial sweetener had been banned in the United States in 1970, but imported cereals and products that slipped through regulatory cracks continued appearing on American shelves into the 80s. Parents trying to reduce sugar in their children's diets sometimes reached for these options without realizing cyclamate had been pulled from domestic production due to concerns about bladder cancer in laboratory animals. The sweetener blended seamlessly with other ingredients, making detection nearly impossible for anyone who did not scrutinize every label. Kids ate these cereals believing they were healthier alternatives, completely unaware that a banned substance was providing the sweetness they loved. Regulators struggled to monitor every imported product, and enforcement gaps allowed cyclamate to persist far longer than it should have. The morning cereal that once seemed like a smart choice now feels like a gamble nobody should have been asked to take. Mercury thermostats with tilt switches were considered the pinnacle of precision climate control, installed proudly in homes across the country as symbols of modern living. The technology seemed elegant, a small glass vial of liquid mercury that tilted as temperatures changed, triggering heating or cooling systems with smooth reliability. Homeowners loved how quietly these devices operated, clicking softly as they maintained comfortable temperatures. The mercury inside each thermostat was sealed, which made people assume it was safe sitting on their walls for years. But mercury does not stay contained forever. Thermostats broke during renovations, fell during earthquakes, or aged until their seals failed. When the silver liquid spilled, it scattered into tiny beads that rolled into carpet fibers, floor cracks, and ventilation systems. Mercury vapor is invisible and toxic, capable of causing neurological damage with prolonged exposure. Families breathed contaminated air without knowing the source. The bans arrived once regulators understood how much mercury had been distributed throughout residential buildings, forcing a massive shift toward digital alternatives. Diet capsules represented one of the most disturbing weight loss methods that circulated during the 1970s, a practice so unsettling that people today can barely believe it existed. The concept was grimly simple. Swallow a capsule containing a sanitized tapeworm egg, let the parasite hatch inside your digestive system, and allow it to consume a portion of everything you ate. Advertisers promised effortless weight loss because the worm would steal calories before your body could absorb them. People desperate to try anything purchased these capsules through mail order catalogs and questionable practitioners who claimed the parasites were safe. What they discovered was far worse than the weight they hoped to lose. Tapeworms grew unpredictably, sometimes reaching enormous lengths, and migrated through the body causing cysts, organ damage, and severe illness. Removing them required medical intervention that was neither pleasant nor guaranteed. Regulators banned the sale of tapeworm capsules outright, classifying them as dangerous. Today, importing or selling them is a serious offense, but this grotesque shortcut remains one of the darkest chapters in diet history. Red dye. Number 3 maraschino cherries sat atop sundaes, floated in cocktails, and decorated countless desserts with their unnaturally bright red glow throughout the 1980s. Children loved fishing these sweet gems out of their drinks and ice cream, savoring the syrupy sweetness that made them taste nothing like real fruit. The dye responsible for that distinctive color was erythrocene, a synthetic compound that had been coloring foods since the early 20th century. Food manufacturers trusted it implicitly, using it in everything from candies to baked goods. But studies eventually linked erythrocene to thyroid problems in laboratory animals, raising concerns that had simmered for decades. The FDA considered banning the dye multiple times, yet it remained in American food products longer than many expected. Finally, in early 2025, regulators announced that red dye number 3 would be prohibited from food products. The announcement gave manufacturers time to reformulate, but it marked the end of an era. Those bright red cherries would never glow quite the same way again. Cyclamate sweetened soft drinks poured freely from vending machines and refrigerator shelves in the 1980s, offering a sugar-free sweetness that dieters embraced without hesitation. The artificial sweetener had been popular for decades, mixed into sodas, powdered drink mixes, and tabletop packets that families kept beside the sugar bowl. People trusted cyclamate because it tasted closer to real sugar than other alternatives, and nobody questioned why something so convenient would ever be a problem. What most Americans did not realize was that the FDA had already banned cyclamate in 1969 after studies linked it to bladder cancer in laboratory animals. The ban should have removed it from shelves entirely, but imported products and leftover stock continued circulating through certain markets well into the 80s. Families who thought they were making healthy choices by avoiding sugar were unknowingly consuming a substance regulators had deemed unsafe years earlier. The cyclamate story became one of the clearest examples of how banned ingredients can linger long after official action, slipping through cracks while consumers remain completely unaware of the risks. Smoking cigarettes in any seat throughout the entire flight was as normal as fastening your seatbelt, and nobody batted an eye when the cabin filled with a soft gray haze drifting between rows like a slow-moving cloud. In the 1970s, ashtrays were built into every armrest, tucked beside tray tables, waiting patiently for passengers to light up before takeoff even finished. Flight attendants offered matches alongside drinks, and the smell of tobacco mixed with recycled air became the signature scent of air travel itself. People smoked during meals, during movies, and during conversations with strangers seated inches away. Children sat beside exhaled smoke without anyone questioning whether it might be harmful. The smoke curled upward toward overhead vents that barely moved it, settling instead into hair, clothes, and upholstery. Flight crews accepted it as part of the job, never imagining a future where lighting a cigarette mid-flight would become a federal offense. Today, the idea of someone pulling out a lighter at 30,000 feet feels absolutely unthinkable. Yet for decades, it was simply what people did. Deep-fried fish sticks made with trans fats were a cafeteria treasure that arrived every Friday like clockwork, golden and crispy and practically glowing under the fluorescent lights. Kids lined up eagerly because Fish Stick Day meant something special, a break from the usual rotation that felt almost celebratory. The breading crackled with each bite, giving way to flaky white fish that tasted vaguely of the ocean and heavily of the deep fryer. What nobody realized was that those fryers bubbled with partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, a cooking fat that made everything crispier and quietly dangerous. Lunch ladies loaded baskets and lowered them into shimmering pools of oil reused all week, each batch absorbing more trans fats that scientists would later connect to heart disease. Parents assumed fried fish was still healthy, still a reasonable choice for growing children. Schools kept serving them because the cost was low and the kids kept eating. But when the truth about trans fats finally surfaced, regulators moved fast. Today, partially hydrogenated oils are completely banned from school kitchens, and the fish sticks that remain taste different, lacking the signature crunch of the forbidden fats. Believe it or not, smoking was part of school culture. Many high schools had official smoking areas outdoors, complete with benches and ashtrays. Teachers would supervise or even join in during breaks. It was considered normal, a way to relax between classes. Cigarette companies marketed heavily to teens, and schools did little to discourage it. The smell of tobacco hung in hallways, on clothes, even in gym lockers. Parents accepted it as a phase, unaware of the health risks we now take for granted. By the late 1970s, as public health campaigns grew, these smoking courts began to disappear. But for years, they stood as a reminder that even in a place meant for learning, bad habits were sanctioned by the system itself. If you were a kid in the early 1970s, you probably remember the sound of clackers, the rhythmic click of two acrylic balls smashing together on a string. They were mesmerizing, addictive, and impossible to put down. Every playground echoed with that familiar clack, clack, clack of triumph. But fun quickly turned to fear when kids started showing up with bruises, cuts, and even eye injuries. The acrylic balls could shatter mid-swing, exploding into shards sharp enough to draw blood. Children compared the loudest clack to a badge of honor, competing to see who could swing them the fastest. But the harder they swung, the greater the danger. Tiny shards flew like shrapnel, sometimes slicing faces and arms. Parents called them toys, but in motion, they looked and sounded more like weapons. Parents panicked. Schools banned them. Yet for a brief moment, clackers were everywhere. Symbols of carefree childhood and the chaos of a decade that loved to experiment. Looking back, it is hard not to laugh at how dangerous, harmless fun once was. They were toys that taught a whole generation one unforgettable lesson. Sometimes excitement really can break in your hands. Pogo balls were the natural next step in the 1980s bounce craze. A rubber disc with a ball in the center, it required balance, coordination, and a healthy disregard for gravity. Kids gripped it with their shoes and jumped until they inevitably fell. Neighborhoods turned into outdoor arenas with kids daring each other to see who could bounce the longest or the highest. The pogo ball squeaked loudly with every jump, creating a rhythm that could be heard down the block. Eventually, that sound meant one of two things: someone was having the time of their life, or someone was about to crash. When it worked, it felt like flying. When it did not, it was an instant faceplant. The grip tore easily, sending kids sprawling onto concrete or grass. Broken wrists, scraped knees, and bruised chins became badges of honor. Schools banned them after too many recess injuries, but that only made them more appealing. Like so many toys of the decade, the pogo ball blurred the line between fun and danger. Looking back, it is amazing anyone survived childhood intact, and even more amazing that we still look back on it all with a smile. The mercury thermometer was the most trusted instrument in your mother's medicine cabinet. A thin glass tube filled with liquid mercury that she slid under your tongue and held there for 3 minutes while you tried not to bite down. When the glass cracked, and it always did, tiny silver beads of elemental mercury scattered across the bathroom floor. Kids chased them with their fingers, pushing the droplets together into larger blobs, fascinated by the way the liquid metal moved. Nobody called poison control. Mercury vapor, invisible and odorless, drifted upward from the tile while the family tried to sweep the beads into a dustpan. A single broken thermometer contains enough mercury to contaminate a small room above safe exposure limits. At least 13 states have since banned mercury thermometers entirely. Cigarette smoke was everywhere. It drifted through living rooms, filled up station wagons with the windows rolled up, and hung in a blue-gray haze above the dinner table. In the 1980s, over 30% of American adults smoked, and the concept of protecting kids from secondhand exposure barely existed. The Surgeon General did not release a report addressing the dangers of involuntary smoking until 1986. Restaurants had smoking sections separated from families by nothing more than a 3-foot gap between tables. Pediatricians' waiting rooms had ashtrays. In 1988, Congress banned smoking on domestic flights shorter than 2 hours, but inside American homes, kids kept breathing it in. Government data from that year showed 88% of non-smokers, including millions of kids, had detectable levels of cotinine, a nicotine byproduct, in their blood. In 1984, the FCC under Reagan relaxed restrictions on advertising to children, and Saturday morning television became an open market for cereal makers. Licensed characters from popular cartoons appeared on cereal boxes and in commercials that blurred the line between entertainment and product placement. The Center for Science in the Public Interest counted 54 Kellogg's commercials in 27.5 hours of Saturday morning programming. 98% promoted nutritionally poor products. Kids absorbed this every weekend, a steady message that sugar-loaded cereals were a normal part of breakfast. The FTC had actually proposed banning ads to preschoolers back in 1978, but Congress stripped the agency of that authority 2 years later under pressure from the food and advertising industries. The Children's Television Act did not pass until 1990. Buffets holding hot food without monitored temperature logs were a staple of family dining in the 1970s, offering endless variety from steam tables that nobody checked with a thermometer. Restaurants filled trays with meatballs, gravy, mashed potatoes, and mystery casseroles, trusting the steam alone to keep everything safe. Staff refilled containers by dumping fresh food on top of old, mixing batches that had been sitting for hours with ingredients just pulled from the kitchen. People loaded their plates without wondering how long the fried chicken had been holding or whether the temperature had dropped into the danger zone where bacteria thrive. The buffet felt abundant and generous, a symbol of plenty that asked no questions about food safety. What diners could not see was how easily pathogens multiplied when temperatures fluctuated or trays sat too long between replenishing. Today, health inspectors require documented temperature logs, time limits on holding food, and strict protocols for replacing rather than topping off containers. The guesswork buffets of the 70s have been replaced by thermometers and paperwork that would have baffled the crowds of that era. If your home was built before the 1970s, there was a narrow slot on the back wall of the medicine cabinet, just wide enough to slide a used razor blade through. The blade dropped into the wall cavity and was never seen again. No collection box, no sealed container, no removal mechanism. The blades fell between the studs and piled up for decades. Renovation contractors who opened bathroom walls in older homes routinely found hundreds of rusted blades stacked in loose piles behind the plaster, some still sharp enough to cut through a work glove. No regulation required the slots to be sealed. No code addressed what happened to the blades once they disappeared. The practice faded as disposable cartridge razors replaced double-edged safety blades, but the walls of older American homes still hold the evidence. The cereals with cinnamil anthranilate flavoring offered a grape or cherry taste that made every bite feel like a small piece of candy had tumbled into the breakfast bowl. This synthetic flavoring was everywhere in the 1980s, hiding inside the coatings, dust, and artificial fruit pieces that made sugary cereals irresistible to children. The flavor was sweet, sharp, and unmistakably artificial. The kind of taste that lingered on the tongue long after the milk turned purple or pink. Families never questioned it because it tasted good and came in boxes decorated with trusted characters and cheerful promises. But scientists eventually discovered a troubling pattern in laboratory tests, linking the compound to potential cancer risks that had gone unnoticed for decades. By the time regulators finally stepped in and banned it, millions of bowls had already been consumed. Looking back, it feels strange to think that something designed to make breakfast more enjoyable was quietly carrying risks nobody discussed at the kitchen table. Those sweet, fruity cereals were symbols of childhood joy, but behind the flavor was a chemical that science would eventually decide had no place in food. Self-cleaning ovens with asbestos panels were marketed as the ultimate kitchen innovation, promising to eliminate the back-breaking chore of scrubbing baked-on grease with nothing more than the turn of a dial. Homemakers marveled at the technology, watching their ovens heat to extreme temperatures and burn away residue while they relaxed. The asbestos lining inside made this magic possible, insulating the oven walls so effectively that the exterior stayed cool even as the interior blazed. Sales soared as families upgraded their kitchens, believing they had conquered one of the most tedious household tasks. What nobody realized was that every cleaning cycle released microscopic asbestos fibers into the kitchen air. These invisible particles drifted through vents, settled on counters, and entered the lungs of anyone nearby. Asbestos fibers do not break down, do not wash away, and do not leave the body once inhaled. By the time scientists understood the connection between asbestos and deadly diseases like mesothelioma, countless families had already breathed in years of contamination. The bans followed, and revolutionary ovens became symbols of how innovation can hide danger. Cyclamate. Artificial sweeteners were everywhere in the 1970s, stirred into coffee cups, baked into diet desserts, and dissolved into beverages marketed to weight-conscious consumers. People trusted cyclamate because it tasted better than saccharin, lacked the bitter aftertaste, and seemed like the perfect solution for anyone wanting sweetness without calories. Families kept packets in their kitchens, restaurants offered them on every table, and food manufacturers loaded their products with the ingredient. Nobody questioned its safety because it had been used for years and seemed completely harmless. But laboratory studies eventually revealed troubling results, showing that cyclamate caused bladder tumors in rats when given in large doses. The findings triggered immediate alarm, and regulators banned the sweetener in 1970, pulling it from shelves almost overnight. People who had consumed it daily suddenly wondered what they had been putting into their bodies and whether the damage might already be done. The ban remains in place today, and for those who lived through the era, cyclamate became a cautionary tale about trusting substances simply because they taste good. Chaca Chaca chili lollipops represented the authentic taste of Mexican candy tradition, with their tangy tamarind coating and fiery chili dusting that made American taste buds curious and Mexican children nostalgic for flavors from home. These lollipops were passed between school children like treasured contraband, each one promising an intensity that regular American sweets could never match. The recipe had been perfected over generations, using techniques and ingredients that connected families to their cultural heritage. But those traditional methods carried risks that nobody anticipated. When health officials began testing imported Mexican candies for lead contamination, Chaca Chaca appeared on warning list after warning list. The lead came from the same sources affecting other chili candies, contaminated soil and equipment that introduced heavy metals during production. The FDA issued import alerts and pulled contaminated batches from American stores. For families who had grown up with these flavors, the news felt like a betrayal of something precious. A candy that had represented cultural connection became another casualty of contamination. Saccharin-sweetened diet candies came wrapped in pink packaging that promised guilt-free sweetness for anyone watching their waistline in the 1980s. Dieters unwrapped these treats with relief, believing they could satisfy sugar cravings without adding calories or threatening weight loss goals. The little tablets dissolved on tongues, the sugar-free gum chewed endlessly, and the diet sodas poured freely because saccharin seemed like the perfect solution to an impossible problem. What the pink packets did not advertise prominently enough was the warning label required by law, stating that saccharin had been found to cause cancer in laboratory animals. People saw the warning and shrugged, convinced that government caution was overblown, and that anything sold so openly must be safe enough. When later studies questioned the original findings, regulators removed the warning labels, but the controversy had already shaken public trust. The pink sweetener that once dominated the diet market became a symbol of conflicting science and the confusing messages families received about what was truly safe to eat. Bringing wrapped gifts through security without screening was a holiday tradition in the 1970s when travelers arrived at airports carrying beautifully decorated packages meant for loved ones waiting at their destination. Nobody asked what was inside the shiny paper and ribbons. Security guards smiled at the festive spirit and waved people through without demanding that presents be opened. Families packed fragile ornaments, surprise toys, and carefully chosen keepsakes, trusting that their wrapping would survive intact. Children clutched boxes they were forbidden to peek inside, adding to the excitement of travel. The airport felt magical during the holiday season, with passengers carrying armfuls of gifts through terminals decorated with lights. It was an era when trust extended even to mysterious packages because hiding something dangerous inside a wrapped box seemed absurd. Today, security officers require that all packages be unwrapped or scanned before passing through checkpoints. Travelers learn quickly to leave gifts unsealed or risk having them opened by gloved hands under fluorescent lights. The magic of carrying a secret surprise has been replaced by practical reality. Unlimited portion sizes with no calorie caps defined the generous spirit of school cafeterias in the 1980s, where lunch ladies piled food onto trays without measuring or restricting what students received. If you wanted more mashed potatoes, you got more. If the serving of spaghetti looked small, a friendly scoop made it larger. Schools operated on the philosophy that growing children needed fuel, and fuel meant food without limits. Nobody tracked calories because nobody thought calories mattered for kids burning energy on playgrounds. The lunch line moved fast, and portions reflected whatever fit on the tray rather than any nutritional calculation. Some students ate modest amounts while others piled their plates high, and both approaches were accepted. But childhood obesity rates began climbing in ways that alarmed health officials. Studies connected unlimited school portions to eating habits that followed children into adulthood. Federal regulations eventually imposed strict calorie ranges for school meals. Today, portion sizes are measured precisely, and seconds are often impossible to obtain. The abundance that once defined cafeteria culture has been replaced by careful control. 60 things that would land you in real trouble today, and most of us did every single one of them before we turned 12. If one of these brought back a memory you have not thought about in years, drop it in the comments. And if you want more from the decade that let kids be kids, subscribe and stick around. There is plenty more where this came from.